Welcome to the Public Works Nerds Podcast.
Welcome to the Public Works Nerds Podcast, a public works podcast of the nerds, for the nerds, and by the nerds. I'm your host, Marc Culver, and welcome back. Welcome to Season 3.
Season 3, here we are.
It's been over 7 months since we've dropped an episode for this podcast at the end of Season 2, which we kind of had a non-ceremonious ending to Season 2. It just kind of happened. But it happened. And part of that is because I've had some changes since that time. So let's talk about that. And then with my guest here, Mr. Marc Ray, a regular on this podcast, Marc Ray, Public Works Director for the City of Burnsville. He's going to talk about a really cool experience he had recently traveling to Australia. And I want to know how the heck that happened. And what did you do while you're down there? What did you learn? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But first, I'm actually going to turn this over to Mr. Ray. And Mr. Ray is going to turn into the podcast host for about 10 minutes here, and then I'm going to take it back. And,
well, I mean, if I'm the host, that's up to me, not you, but I appreciate the optimism.
I think this is kind of like the legislature. I think we have to have an agreement in place prior to the shift of power that clearly defines the limits of that power. But in any event, but seriously, why don't you take over and just interview me for a few minutes? So
here we are, Marc. Season 3.
Yep.
Is that weird to say?
It is. I mean, I'm happy to say it. And it, part of the weird thing about that is what actually defines a season. And I think that kind of comes down to, I'm probably just going to turn that into like a calendar year thing. But yeah, it's a little weird. I didn't know where this thing was going to go when it started. When we did start, there was a different person at the table, Mike Spack, who I'm internally grateful still for helping me get this thing going. This wouldn't have happened without his spark of an idea and talking to my boss at the time. But yeah, I'm excited. And I should say this, that yes. So Season 3. I'm excited that Season 3 has started.
As you reflect back on the critical role that Mike had in this and how you've grown as a person and you have evolved, what has surprised you in all this?
I guess one thing that has surprised me is how easy it is to like actually do these episodes, like once it gets going. I love this like conversational model that we have in these episodes, and we do nerd out about topics, but we do so in a way where we're just like talking about it versus having a script or anything like that. If you know me, I'm a bit of a procrastinator. I don't want to say I'm lazy, but I don't do a lot of prep work for stuff. And so this makes it a little easier. It surprised me how easy it's been to have these conversations, put these episodes together without having to do a lot of work behind the scenes to get it going. But otherwise, it's also surprised me how many people listen to this. I would love for it to be more. I mean, we always want more. But when I was at PWX in Atlanta in September, and you've got people that are reaching out to you to say, "Hey, are you at PWX?" Or recognizing you, just walking by them, like, "Oh, are you?"
I will admit that was one of the most surreal things, and horrible confusion, hilarious.
Yeah.
Of like, hey, are you involved with the podcast? Like, no, but I know the guy who is.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
that's when I know you'd made it to the big time.
Right. Yeah, the big time. But shout out to Danielle Green who reached out to me and is a big listener out in California. But and so many others. I mean, there's just so many people out there that I did have like just quick little conversations with, like, "Oh, you're that podcast guy." Yeah. So that was surprising, and that's fun. And I'm really looking forward to following up with some of those people to do episodes with, and find out what they're passionate about, what do they want to nerd out about, and talk about some public works stuff with them. So that's been good. But yeah, so But one of the things that surprised me since I recorded my last episode is I don't work for Bolton and Mank anymore. I'm happy. I'm really happy to say that I've taken a job as the city engineer for the city of Brooklyn Park in Minnesota since you've last heard from me. But and that's been great. I realized at some point that my real passion is just in the public sector. You know, actually working for a city, working on projects that I own, so to speak, and that I can really be a steward of for a longer period of time, make decisions on things like that. But so I'm really just excited to be there and working on some really cool projects. Like we're designing a light rail system that goes from downtown Minneapolis into Brooklyn Park. We're working with MnDOT on converting an expressway into a freeway. Hopefully that happens. It's a whole nother episode in of its own. We got 700 acres of land to develop in Brooklyn Park, so I'm really looking forward to helping that come along, figure out how we're going to get water main in certain places and roads and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, a lot of fun. And I'm just going to take a moment to say, give my appreciation to Bolton Mank. My former boss, Chris Cromie at Bolton Mank, brought me there. He helped me get this podcast going. He gave me permission to spend time on this, and gave me the resources to really make it work. And Tony Solis at Bolton Mank, who is my producer, just really I can't say thank you enough to that organization and those people for helping me get this podcast going, and also just taking a shot at me that maybe didn't pay off for them, but helped me realize who I really am and where I really need to be. So anyway, so that's that.
And I think with that, there's two key things. First of all, I think that's a testament to the engineers and consultants we work with in the profession here in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And whether it be their support for the American Public Works Association chapter, the Minnesota chapter here, or just the profession as a whole, is that they're willing to invest in what might be seen as non-traditional things or try something new for the sake of the profession. And I think that definitely shouldn't be lost in the transitions that have happened. So again, shout out to Bolton and Mank.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, actually, Mark. That and Bolton and Mank, and one of the reasons that I went to them to begin with is they have been so innovative in the services they provide and trying out new things and trying to push things. And this smart cities thing was something that we tried to push, and it partly didn't work out, but partly I also realized who I am and where I need to be. So it was just kind of a combination of that. But still a great organization, some great people there that I'm still obviously working with, and we're doing things at Brooklyn Park with them on some stuff. So still the work. They still talk to me, so that's good. And I still talk to them. So.
Well, I think the second thing that really ties in so many different ways, right? It's just change.
Yeah.
And just whether being intentional about the personal growth and understanding where you are and seasons may be changing in life, or a professional thing, or employers and employees, as companies looking at exploring new things. And we really need to, I think one of the biggest problems and challenges we have in public works is what we've done has generally been successful. And that in of itself can be part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Is that there might be some hesitation to try to push the envelope a little bit to see where we could go and be different.
Well, and to that point, it's interesting because, and we've talked about this through episodes, and even your own episode, your very first episode with me, which was our very first episode of this podcast when we we're talking about emergency management. That we are risk adverse in public works and in government for a reason. Like, we can't spend millions of dollars on something on the chance that it might work. Mm-hmm. I mean, we still kind of do that sometimes, and there are private public partnerships where it's a little more risky, but the agency probably doesn't have as much money invested in that. But it's hard to be really truly innovative when we're spending public dollars. And that's like you said, like, we're generally successful in what we do, and that's kind of by design. Mm-hmm. Like, we have to be.
Well, I mean, because the clock for us isn't an election cycle.
Yeah.
Not multiple, it's generations.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I like about the profession, right, is we build for generations. but we have to balance that tendency to push the envelope and try new things with sort of what do we know works,
Yep.
because at the end of the day, it is public dollars, and everything is, if I do this, everything's an opportunity cost. If I do this, I can't do something else. And so how do we responsibly do that to meet the needs of communities, meet the
Right.
future needs of communities, even though we may not necessarily know exactly what that looks like.
Yep.
For example, if light rail shows up, or if you redevelop 700 acres
Yep.
and you have that blank slate to work with.
Yeah. You know, even coming into Brooklyn Park, and my role is as city engineer, but you know, I've got a really great organization that also wants to make use of some of my knowledge and experience as a public works director from Roseville as well. And we have conversations about things that we want to do in the future. You know, we're implementing asset management, we're implementing cartograph, and I, you know, it's like you said, you look at the resources that you have, and it's like, okay, where and when can we grow this? When can we add this module or that module? When can we do this? We look at using AI for pavement ratings and things like that, and it's like, well, we've only got so much budget, you know. So it's that constant conversation of, you know, we want to do more things, we want to do newer things, but we have to prioritize what we have, what we want to do against the dollars that we have too. So, and the time. I mean, there's resources aren't just money; it's staff time too. So,
I think a big part of that too is what is the investment going into the reward coming out, right? We're in a world right now where data, you can get a ton of data about whatever it is you want. But what is the decision you're trying to make, and how much information do you need? I think it was Colin Powell in his book said generally you need about 60% of the information, I think is what he said in his book, to make the right decision. And so you have this analysis paralysis of, well, if I had 70% or 80%, the reality is the outcome doesn't necessarily change.
Yeah.
And so I think a challenge of those in the profession is, how do you find that 60%?
right. How do you know when you have 60%?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what is the right 60%? I also want to give a quick shout out, and this will tie into our later conversation, to David Jenkins, who's the CEO with IPWEA. They've done some amazing work around asset management. We can touch on that later. But,
Yeah.
for anybody
What does
listening,
IPWEA stand for?
that is an amazing acronym. It is the Institute of Public Works Engineering Australasia.
Ooh.
So it's basically a whole bunch of public works and engineering professionals in that Asia, Australia, New Zealand area.
Cool.
But I got to meet him while I was down in Australia. But I originally saw a presentation they did actually at PWX. So shout out for anybody going to that. That's a great opportunity to learn more. And they are definitely on the leading edge of asset management and some of the courses they've developed, and how they're asking the questions to get the right information to inform long-term decision making. So definitely encourage anybody to dig into some of the resources there.
Well, let's actually use that as a great segue of what did you do this fall?
How did that all play out?
Yeah.
So I have the honor and privilege of serving on the executive board of the local road research board for the state of Minnesota. And as part of that, in promoting the great work that's happening here with our research efforts, and also just learning more about what's happening elsewhere, not only in the U.S., but around the world, we had the opportunity to travel to some conferences. And so I had the privilege of going to Australia in late August for their Small Bridge Conference.
Small Bridge Conference.
Small Bridge Conference.
Now, saying you went to Australia is like saying you went to the United States. So where in Australia did you go?
Yeah, so it's up in the Brisbane area, which is Queensland. So if you're looking at the map of Australia, generally the kind of the northeast quadrant was generally where I was. And because the public works profession is worldwide, I worked with APWA's CEO, Scott Grayson, to make some contacts.
Cool.
Down in Australia. So I landed in the Gold Coast, came down the escalator, and there was Peter Lee, who's the CEO of Municipal Works Australia, him, and then Gavin Goldke with the Scenic Rim Regional Council, which is probably best equated roughly to a county government here, kind of how to think about it. We're there. They literally picked me up. We grabbed my bags, jumped in Gavin's truck, and went out, and we had lunch and then toured the Scenic Rim area. And they took me to a timber bridge that their staff had just rebuilt in-house. We looked at some landslide issues on some of the more mountainous areas and talked about how storms and weather patterns and power impact that area. And it was just so fascinating to see it. And then
So you landed, I'm sorry, you landed in.
so I flew into Sydney and
Sydney.
then flew up to the Gold Coast.
Okay. And
walked off. They picked me up
and so like how remote is the Gold Coast?
It's not. It's
okay.
It's
well when you're like you're
yeah,
talking about
no, that's
landslides
fair.
and stuff like that. I was
So
like, I'm picturing
we
this.
we started at the ocean and then kind of
Yep.
drove up into the mountains
Yep. Okay.
from there. So it got more remote, but it was
Australia has mountains. I didn't know that.
Has
I
the
knew
Blue
I knew New Zealand did.
Yeah.
But
we're not talking like snow covered mountains.
Yeah.
We're talking, West Virginia kind of.
yeah,
mountains.
yeah.
But
West Virginia.
there you
Mountain
go.
Mama.
Okay, this is the Nerds podcast, not the Acapella Con.
Yeah, we just
podcast.
lost
We better-
75% of our listeners there. But anyway.
Down to one. I'm just kidding. And so some fascinating things. They were talking about how they have to source local wood, right? And this makes total sense when you talk about it. Local wood's accustomed to the climate. And so if they were to outsource wood from other parts of the country, it doesn't change seasonally like the wood. And so you put it in a bridge that's, tightened with like turnbuckles, all of a sudden you have movements you wouldn't necessarily anticipate.
Yeah. So
just a fascinating, totally makes sense. Not something that I necessarily, interact with on a daily basis.
Right. So this timber bridge that they showed you that they built in house, what was the span?
Oh, it was like probably a 40-foot bridge. It wasn't big. I think it connected to 3 properties.
Yeah.
But one of them ran more of a commercial operation out of it. So it wasn't just 2 residential properties, some cars a day. I think it was under 100 vehicles a day, but definitely had to carry some significant weight on it.
That's cool. What kind of bridge was it?
Just a normal timber bridge.
Okay.
Then we drove by another one they had just redone that had some localized flooding. And so I think they'd raised it up or made a wider flow through there for the water.
Okay.
And there's fascinating things like, yes, I realize they drive on the other side of the road, but I found myself wondering, could you compare a left turn crash in the United States to a right turn crash in Australia? And how would that compare?
Right.
No, left. No, I'm just kidding. That was
Ha ha ha.
we just lost that last 25% of listeners. And so that was just a fascinating, as we were driving around, I just found myself thinking about, is it really a comparison? Or like, how would roundabout crashes compare, right? Because yes, it's the same and it's also different.
Right.
So, and I don't know how you'd prove one way or the other. I mean, traffic volumes and all that stuff, but it was just a fascinating way of trying to think about where are the comparisons and where are things different, just strictly based on where you're sitting in a vehicle.
Yeah. What are the, from your, and you're a recovering traffic engineer like me. What were some of the things that really stood out to you as far as being different from a traffic engineering perspective?
Well, the first one, we were driving on the highway and they had wood barricades across a lane that they had closed.
Huh.
And I was like, wow, would not have anticipated that one.
Yeah.
I think also some of the signage, and I can't remember certain examples, right? But speed limits, I think, are, black lettering instead of red circle.
Okay.
And just how we communicate with the public and how we have this standard for the US and it's different in other countries.
And you've been to Europe, right?
Not a ton. No.
Okay. But I'm imagining that Australia's signage and striping and that is probably more in line with Europe than it is the US.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's just more one of those, should we think about something differently?
Yeah.
Or what is something simple as a speed limit, right? We say speed limit is a square sign, but do black letters in a red circle, does that communicate something differently to people?
Right. Is it more effective?
Right.
Somehow, some way.
Exactly.
Right. I also found it really interesting driving around Europe that they don't use yellow lines like we do. Like all their lines are white.
Mm-hmm.
They don't, and for me, it'd be just like super confusing.
Right.
Like, where am I supposed to
be?
be?
Is this all a one-way or am I taking my life into my own hands?
Is that the same in Australia?
I was trying to look that up. I believe that is the case. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm asking him questions I didn't prep him for. So
That's okay. We're ad-libbing this.
so talk a little bit more about
Yeah, so here I have the video.
Yeah.
There's the video on the highway, right? We see the
Yep.
metal frames with wood.
Yeah, and
with wood
on the left
crossbars.
side is a solid white line.
Right.
Like, how am I supposed to know which side which
Right.
way I'm supposed to be driving here?
Don't worry, just drive faster.
Just drive faster. Just get off the road quicker. So talk a little bit more about some of the things you learned in Australia.
Yeah, so the small bridge conference itself.
Yeah.
I kind of did more of the asset management track because that's just fascinating to me and how they do that. And some of the things they talked about that really were amazing was when they do inspections of whatever. I'm going to go inspect, let's say, a culvert. They actually subdivide that, right? So what's a level 1 inspection would just be like an annual routine inspection, happens on a fixed base, generally just visual.
Mm-hmm.
That goes up to,
and they do that annually for all of theirs.
No, it depends. It
Okay,
depends on what it is. But, but they have this standard language of I did a level 1 inspection, or I did a level 2, which would be a more detailed, has some measurements for like if there's shift or whatever. Really would feed into kind of more informing maintenance stuff. Then a level 3 would be really full on in engineering investigations to try to figure out, what's happening with the scenario. But it was interesting to hear about just something as simple as an investigation and having a common terminology for what that means and how we think about that and what do we do with that information.
Well, we're supposed to have that in the U.S. We've got our and I should know more about this now that I'm back in this role and I actually have some bridges in my system that we're supposed to be inspecting in that. But it's probably very like anything else, or like our incident command system, where there's the terminology, and if you're in it, you remember it, and if you're not in it, it's like, I kind of vaguely recall there's a term for that.
And there were some amazing donuts in that class.
Right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, just because of how we handle bridge inspections and that on the local basis, we don't always have dedicated staff. That's kind of what it is. Like, you're opening the manual up every so often just to try to refresh things. But in any event, yeah. So we keep going with
and then also the common things, right?
Yep.
For example, we know that the wear and tear on our roads, loads on the roads are higher than probably what they were originally designed for in some scenarios. And so what does that mean for deformation long term, for future maintenance needs? Also, codes, designs have changed over time. And so as we think about the infrastructure that's out there, not only is it, hey, replacing what's there, but it's how are we keeping in mind conditions have changed.
Yeah.
And planning for that, we go and impact things. This is a hilarious term. It's called the bathtub curve that they talked about.
Yeah.
Which is
I saw that and it like kind of jumped out at me.
Yeah.
But
so it's a bathtub or a U, but really what they say is your failure rates are the highest at basically infant mortality. So very early in a project under construction, right? You think about false work failing and stuff. And then towards the end of life as things wear out. But risk actually drops during the normal use of the life.
Which makes sense.
Which makes total sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I just had never, like, when you hear it, you're like, well, yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
But until it's actually pointed out in those very basic terms, I was like, I hadn't really thought about it that way.
Yeah, and and not having taken the class, but I would imagine part of the issue there is accurately predicting that end of life. When that risk starts to really curve back up, you're not always aware of that because you may not always understand what the life cycle of your bridge is, or that it is starting to fail just because of age. That's a really good way to think about it, is really increasing awareness of when that curve starts to go back up again, being aware of that.
Well, and the question then, so the next thing is how do you monitor for that? And so Australia and some other European countries are doing some really interesting work on placing real-time sensors on bridges.
Yep.
To collect data on movements and loads, and then try to use that to inform, hey, here's what we should monitor, or hey, this bridge is getting close to being replaced. And so again, collecting the right data to inform decision making long term.
I wonder at what scale that is, an effective an economical thing to do. Like the timber bridge you talked about, that's got a 40-foot span or something, that's serving three driveways. Would it ever make sense? Would it ever be economically feasible to put sensors on a bridge like that? You know,
Or in the bridge,
or in the bridge, right?
right? So I definitely wonder about that. And the reality is, if you have a bridge that's gonna be 60, 100 years old, how are you powering that sensor?
Yeah,
How are
yeah,
you?
yeah,
How
it's a
are
good point.
you? The other big thing, right, is they don't have snow in Australia in the area I was, and so you don't have salt.
Yeah,
And so from a corrosive standpoint,
it's going to last longer.
absolutely
Yeah,
plays into
yeah,
the conversation.
yeah. That's cool. I love that. Just sometimes it's so helpful and enlightening to just hear somebody talk about something from a different perspective.
Oh, 100%.
And just a different set of experiences, and it's kind of this aha moment of, yeah, that makes sense. We should I really kind of think about that. And
one of the funny ones they had was they had sensors on a bridge to measure weight. Then they had a camera photoing the vehicle, like our mobile, or not mobile weigh stations, like fixed based weigh stations, right? And so what they would do is they would have vehicles come across. They'd have the read of the weight. They'd also capture the speed and then have a photo of the vehicle, and then use that to watch the deformation in the road or the
Yeah.
bridge as they went across.
yeah,
That was fascinating for a variety of reasons, from just the integration of, I have speed data on vehicles, I have weight information. Oh, and I'm trying to link this back to maintenance information,
right.
where we might link weight with enforcement, speed with enforcement, kind of jump them into separate buckets. It was very much kind of a whole picture. And they also said in this, you have to keep that whole thing simple. That as you monitor all these trucks or whatever, it is a tool, but it is not the be all end all.
Right.
You still have to use judgment and thoughts on, okay, what do we have this data and how are we going to use it?
Yeah. Cool. It sounds like when you were describing that, I just had images of being in the basement of Kaufman Hall and 5 levels, 6 levels down or whatever, in a structures lab or something, watching some things.
Yeah, well, I definitely encourage your listeners to go to a real university where they don't lock your engineering students in the basement. University of Wisconsin, Madison would definitely be an option there.
Is that where you went?
Yeah.
God, I just recorded another episode with somebody who was a Badger, and I just shake my head.
They'd like to replace their engineering hall. So keep up with that basement bunker vibe.
Yep. Yep. We're talking about the University of Minnesota. Their civil engineering department is it's a pretty, I mean, it's a cool building. It's, architecturally very interesting, but instead of going up, it goes down into the ground, several
fitting,
floors.
I guess that's fair.
Yeah. Well, we're civil engineers. We're just being locked away in a basement
Right.
somewhere. Yeah.
I think the other thing too with this, and it ties back to what you said about just inspecting bridges. They talked about using LiDAR and drones, and each type has their own strengths and drawbacks. And you really need to think about, what is the outcome you want?
Mm-hmm.
And then selecting the right tool for it, and not just saying, hey, this is a fancy new whatever, let's do it. Because you may not actually get the information you want. Or even they touched on just integrating it with your existing systems, where if you capture this whole new set of information, but you have no way to integrate it with the information you already have, what does that mean?
Yeah.
One of these top here, I just look at my notes, drones really struggle to detect and measure hairline cracks in steel and concrete. And obviously any of that stuff, you can't see non-visual issues. And so just, things to keep in mind as you're selecting a platform to gather information.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear this about Australia and what they're doing there. And I know, like, when, if you didn't know, we had a huge big bridge collapse here in Minneapolis in 2007. And when they rebuilt that, I know they built that with a bunch of those in bridge sensors and that to monitor a lot of the same things. And I think when they built the St. Croix Bridge across the St. Croix River between Minnesota and Wisconsin, they also did the same, I think, similar thing. So we're seeing it more and more in these larger bridges for this exact reason, is just so you can understand that bathtub curve. When is that happening? When is that end of life?
Well, and what are good
happening?
sources of data
Yeah.
to help make those decisions too? I love this quote. I've heard it all over. All models are wrong, but some are useful. And that was one of the things they kind of stress, is as you collect all this data, you can't take the person and the analysis out of it.
Right.
AI, all you can heavy process stuff, but if you don't understand what's going into the system, the coming out could be a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that garbage in, garbage out.
Mhm.
But I like that sound bite, so to speak.
Then the scary part of the presentation, I went to a session on bridge fires.
Ooh.
And they talked about how bridges that are over 50 years old are more vulnerable to fire, and then fires are occurring on bridges at a higher chance than tunnels. And I think that goes back to just restrictions on what you can take into tunnels.
Right. For that very reason. But yeah.
But the part that really made me think was obviously PVCs and plastics burn, right? So if you think about the drainage systems that are in bridges, if fires get into those systems, what does that mean? How do you put it out? Have you now basically compromised the bridge from the inside if
Right.
you have a PVC that's been compromised? And I took that one step further. My mind is, okay, we use liners for sanitary sewer, stormwater. We use PVC or HDPE for piping underground. If something were to happen, and hopefully it doesn't, because we've all done really good at reducing I&I, but if something were to get in there and catch on fire, I get it would have to be very hot, right? Because it's high plastic. But if it were to happen, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very make you think kind of
Right.
moment of
Right.
what would happen.
Yeah. And it all depends on the environment that you're in.
100%.
And, like if you're in the middle of, if it's cast in the middle of a bridge, that's a little
Right.
different
Well,
than.
and what's leaked, what's burning,
Yeah.
temperature, all that jazz.
Yeah.
But it was one of those cascading things that you wouldn't necessarily have thought about.
Right.
So yeah, 2-day conference, and then I went back to Sydney. My brother actually lives in Sydney, and then had the opportunity to meet up with, again, David Jenkins and then Jonathan Jones, both IPWA. Met with them for lunch and just learned more about all the amazing things they've done with asset management and trying to help me prepare my mind to wander more into that space.
Yeah. And I think asset management is much more baked in Australia into government agencies and that than it is here. Do you know some of the details of that?
They have some requirements on how you track stuff, and I think it's a broad brush with how that's done, but it's a little more ingrained in, hey, okay, when this comes up for replacement, have you already been thinking about that since it started?
Right. And I know Michigan has, and we've talked about this before, episode with Russ Mathis talking about like an asset management kind of group here in Minnesota, or some potential requirements. But Michigan has some requirements that are tied to actual funding, that if you're not reporting your CIP and some condition monitoring, that you may not be eligible for some state funding and such. And so I think that's a really good kind of way to do it, is, put some onus and some accountability, I guess, on the agency to make sure that they know that they are planning for an end of life,
It's always the carrot and the stick, right?
Yep.
So it's not going to get easier. I think it's pretty clear that all agencies of government have to make some hard decisions on what does the future look like, what can we afford to do,
right?
What do we want to do, what can we afford to do, and then what can we afford to maintain long term.
Yeah. And there are certain things that you kind of have to maintain, like, if you're supplying water to a community, well, you kind of need to make sure that your water treatment facility is going to operate for a long period of time, that how to rehabilitate that when you need to, that your pipes are going to be in good shape for a period of time, and you have pumps that work, and this, that, and the other.
But even more than that, it's also telling the story of, it's not just drinking water, right? It's public safety for fire suppression.
That's true.
It's public health
Yep.
for washing your hands and basic cleanliness.
Yeah.
And so, water is life, right? It's essential to all of that. And I think to an extent, sometimes we just kind of choke it down to, oh, it's drinking water. It's really not. It's really across all these different kind of critical infrastructure sectors of public health and public safety, and then obviously just the water part of it. And how do we help tell that story to the public, to our elected officials? And quite frankly, I would submit to you, how do we help them take pride in that stuff?
Yeah.
Because it's generally out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, say your soundbite.
Well, I mean, yeah. So Public Works makes normal happen,
That's right.
And the way I sort of articulate this is we are like the stage crew for everybody's life.
Yep.
Right. The people are on stage living their life, but there are people behind the scenes making that happen that they may or may not even know about. And so trying to create that whole ecosystem, bring light to it, I think is ultimately where we're gonna have to go as a profession, because what we do is really cool, and it's also generally out of sight, out of mind.
Until something goes wrong.
And
But
I don't want to be flippant about taking it for granted,
right.
as if people don't care. But if it's always there, it's like the speed limit sign that nobody pays attention to because
Right.
it's always there, and I'm gonna drive when I feel comfortable on that street, right? It's just kind of part of the churn of life.
Yeah. This has been your annual reminder. I feel like we've done this whenever we record an episode with Mr. Ray here. We get into that conversation about how we are in the background, but we need to be more out in front and advocating for what we need. Resources and people and monies and things, but that we do make normal happen. So like I said, it's your
So
annual
feel free to
reminder.
use that term.
Yep.
Make normal happen.
Yep.
Please
I
capitalize.
use it a lot, and
Please-
I'm usually pretty good at crediting Mr. Ray.
Please
when
make
I
sure you
use it, but-
capitalize every letter in that. You can also use terms like build with maintenance in mind,
Yeah.
or we are the stage crew to your life.
Yeah.
I think those are all terms that I hope people can identify with. I'm actually trying to work with Burnsville High School to go in and talk with their drama crew and the people on stage crew to talk about careers in public works.
Cool.
Because I think that's a group that may not have any idea what we do, but there's a lot of parallels there.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
excited to
I agree.
Get that lined up.
Well, hey, this has been great. It's been kind of a quick episode and just a really quick review of this amazing trip you got to take out to Australia, and I'm extremely jealous. I got to figure out how to get in that.
Well, you got to get some
but-
listeners in Australia to bring you down and
there you go.
do a show, right?
There you go.
Or sponsors.
If you're
obviously.
listening in Australia, let me know.
Yeah, if you're interested in sponsoring this amazing podcast, also let them know.
I'll
You just
take
take
that.
a drink. I got you
I'll
covered.
take that. So just as we conclude here, I just want to give, this is our first episode of season 3. I just want to give a little bit of a preview of what I've got planned, what's coming up here. I actually just recorded an episode on PFAS, and I have a feeling we're going to be doing a couple of episodes on that very important topic. That's one of those really nerdy topics. We get into some of the chemistry in that, and so hopefully that's interesting. You guys enjoy nerding out on that topic. Did a follow-up episode with Nick Egger from the city of Rosemont on his maintenance facility that they just moved into. Planning on talking with one of the big asset management companies, talking about what's the future of asset management and how are they planning on using and incorporating AI into that product and helping agencies manage their assets. Yeah, and others episodes as I get them organized and such.
That said, listeners, if you have ideas, don't hesitate to reach out, right?
Exactly. Always interested in topic ideas. If you're really passionate about something and you want to talk about it, if you want to nerd out about it, shoot me an email or put a comment somewhere. Let me know, and we'll connect through LinkedIn, and we'll figure it out. We'll get you on. Probably see us doing a lot of remote episodes as I try to get more and more national guests going as
And
well.
international.
And hopefully
potentially.
international, right? Maybe I should talk to
we can
Mr.
make some
Jenkins.
connections.
Yeah.
I think that'd be great.
I think that would be very interesting. I would love to hear more about how Australia does require some of this asset management and how they use a carrot.
Well,
and
and
a
the
stick,
resources that they've developed.
Yep.
Really to help deliver and execute on that.
Yep.
So,
Cool. Well, hey, thanks for joining us, Mark, on this kickoff episode to season 3. I'm sure we'll have you back.
Season 3. What episode number are we at?
Oh God, why'd you have to ask me that right now? I think we're on 32 or 33 or something. So I should have looked at that.
What has been the most surprising thing? Let's wrap this up. Season 3, most surprising thing doing podcasts. Is it the technology needed?
I mean,
Is it
having
effort?
now that I'm doing this a little bit more on my own and having had to procure some equipment, Shout out to another former guest, Michael Thompson, who was able to help me get a couple of really nice microphones through a connection he had. But buying an Audio Mux, all the cabling to make it work, the microphones themselves, just some of the technical issues, and you're going to hear one of those technical issues on the episode with Nick Egger. You don't realize how much work goes into a production that really sounds and looks good. And I was really fortunate to have an awesome producer in Tony Solis and Bolton and Mink that had all that equipment and set it up and knew what they were doing. And now I'm kind of learning how to do that on my own. But it's still fun. I'm kind of a techie guy, and so I like to.
In
play
other
with all that
news,
stuff.
you're also starting a part-time gig as a DJ with all this stuff.
Right. That'll maybe be the next thing. Yeah, because I got the stuff, absolutely. But hey, thanks again, Mark, for joining.
I'm just trying to think what your DJ name would be right now.
Well, I'm
DJ Roundabout.
Empty Hammer, man. Marc Culver, MC Pub. No, we'll work on that. We'll take suggestions.
Yeah.
We're open to suggestions on that.
Mark, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
being
you.
here as always.
And listeners, thanks as always for listening and joining us. Follow the podcast on LinkedIn primarily. We're going to try to get on some other social media platforms, but on LinkedIn in particular, we would love if you could like some of the posts about these episodes, comment on that, because share them, because it really does help spread the word and get it out in front of more people as we try to grow this audience. And again, send us those episode ideas. Let me know you're out there. Let me know you're listening, what you like and what you don't like.
I can tell you he very much appreciates that. It's good.
Yep.
It warms the heart.
Yep.
Mark. So.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Nerds out.